So yeah, my name is Mark Richardson. I'm a librarian here at Cedar Mill Library, and I wanted to introduce Joshua Williamson. He is a comic book author. He's done a couple of programs for us before. He's got a lot of fascinating stories, and I thought you guys would like to hear some of them about what it's like to be a comic book writer, and you know, how he got started, and you know, all sorts of different things that are involved in writing for comic books and publishing comic books. So, yeah. Joshua Williamson, everyone.
I've written probably maybe like 150 graphic novels at this point. Primarily what I focus on is monthly comic books. And so we release these things like this. So like one of the things I write right now is Superman. This came out in February. As you can tell, it's like super thin, right? So it's periodical, it's like a magazine, it comes out monthly. What I do is I write them in this format for the most part. We write them like this, and then eventually they collect them in these kinds of graphic novels. So like this one was a book series I did called Birthright. There's actually 10 of these, 10 volumes of this one. It's like a family and fantasy sort of, like almost borderline YA kind of book. And then you other things like this, like I did Robin, same thing. So it was this collected. But then I've done things like this, which this was for kids. It was a kid's book I did. Same thing with this one over here. And these were standalone graphic novels that I did about 10, 15 years ago.
All right. Oh, there's a seat in the front too.
So yeah, mostly I write comic books. I have been doing it full time since about 2010. I started trying to learn how to write when I was a kid. You know, when I was in like 4th grade, I was like, I just want to make comic books. That was it. That's all I ever wanted to do. Either that or be an Imagineer working at Disney. Those were always the goals. But then when I went to college and I was learning art, I started really heading towards the graphic novel area of my life. So I published my first, what's called a mini comic. I can show you what a mini comic is. With you, I'm not going to show as much as I did with the kids because the kids was very much geared towards kids. I don't think I need to show you the kind of kiddie stuff that I was doing. But with demos and these called mini comics. So mini comics was basically just literally like this. We would take paper, we would print them, of course, we weren't drawing them. But we would make them on these, like, you know, we called them Kinko's comics when I was a kid because we just go to Kinko's and you would print them out. But we would do this on mini comics. And I would go and I would hand them out to people. I'd go to conventions, go to editors, and just show them those. That's how I ended up getting work in comics, was through that. And then about 2010, I would say, is when I became a full-time comic writer. So it took me about 10 years almost to really be like, this is what I'm doing every day and getting paid for it. So that was my income was coming from that. And so I've been doing that ever since. Any questions so far?
So do you just draw do you just write them, or do you do the drawing as well?
Depends. So when I was first starting out, I would do both. You know, I would write and draw. Now I only write them at this point. Every once in a while I'll draw something about and explain it. So like, for example, in this book here, with the artist, when I was trying to explain, you know, what I meant in a certain scene, this scene right here, I actually drew this out to show him, but I drew it as like a really rough drawing. Here. But I'll show you what my format is. I have a copy of it in this one. Some of these are kids' books, some are teenage books, some of them are way more adult. Like this one are very much more adult. Like this one's about serial killers. So it's very much so, you can tell by even the design of it. This is all blood and bloody hands and stuff. You can tell. This is one of my most famous works, the book I did called Nail Biter. It was about 16 of the world's worst serial killers. Were all born and raised in the same small town. An FBI agent goes there to try to find out what was going on in the town. Like, why was 16 serial killers happen to be born in a small town in Oregon? That's what he's trying to figure out. It's called Buckaroo, Oregon. So it's a made-up town. So for a secret for all of you, it was actually Malala. But I made that up. I was living in Malala at the time, which, if you know, it's out in the middle of nowhere. So I based it on my experience living in the town. There are no serial killers there, but just small town stuff. You're out there, you can tell a little different. But the worst of these serial killers, his name was the Nail Biter. I think we're too squeamish. We're going to talk about horror comics for a moment. The Nail Biter, what he would do is would only kidnap people who would chew their nails. And then he would kidnap them and keep them captive while their nails grew out, and then he would chew their nails for them, and they would kill them. So that's what this comic is about. I know, right? But it was very popular. People love serial killers, I learned. You know, it was very much like a True Detective kind of Twin Peaks sort of thing. You know, it actually started coming out before Twin Peaks did, but not Twin Peaks, before True Detective came out. But once it was out, we got compared to True Detective a lot. Had a lot of similar kind of themes. And then in here, I can show this to you guys anytime. These are the scripts that I wrote to explain what was happening. And so what I'll do to answer your question, I write out, so right here in page 1, panel 1, I wrote a small suburban home late at night. And I give way more description about what kind of house it is. I write like, oh, there's cop cars in the front, but they're like racing to this house, you know. It'll be like a kind of a creepy looking house. The artist, he then went and drew it. So he actually lives in Portland as well. So we talk on the phone, we meet in person, and then he drew it. So small house, suburbs night, cop cars pulling up, you know, and then to give you a little bit of a horror example, here's the nail biter with one of his victims, just to scare all of you with the grossness of this comic. Again, it was super popular. But that was this one. What's funny is that so this artist, when I started working with him, he actually lived in Rhode Island. And so we would do almost everything via text. Like I would write the scripts and send to him an email. But we had questions, we would text each other. We did not meet until after it was already out. We actually met at an airport on our way was signing. That's how we actually met each other for the first time, but it had already been done. Like we'd already done a lot of work on it. This artist, the artist who worked on this, he actually lives in Brazil. This artist lived in Russia for a while. He actually left Russia recently, but he was there. So it was like all via chat or emails. Like we never spoke on the phone. I think he and I spoke once over to Zoom, but for the most part it was all via email. So I write the script and then I give it to the artist, and then the artist goes and they draw it. And then we talk to each other, we go back and forth. They have questions, I have questions. It just depends at that point. But yeah, a lot of communication after that. And then you work with the editor, and then you get the final product. Any other questions I can keep going? Yeah, go ahead.
So you do the writing and somebody else does the artwork. And then who compiles and gets it all together? Is that the editor?
The editor, yeah. So I'll give you an example, a couple different examples of this. So with this one, this was a kid's book I did. It was called Dear Dracula. This was turned into a cartoon. It was on Cartoon Network. But it started off as a book that my best friend and I made together. So with this one, we didn't have an editor. You know, we had a publisher, and that was it. And so with this one, we pretty much did everything ourselves. You know, like I went to school for art and for production. So I can actually make a book pretty much by myself if I wanted to. So with this one was a little different. It was very much like a little more on the indie side, you know. So it was like I wrote it. He was crashing on my couch at the time. So, you know, I would go to my day job, and then while I was at my day job, he would, you know, sit at our dining room table and he would draw the art. And then he colored it. I did all the lettering, so I created all the word balloons. These are called word balloons. I go in here, I would do all the little production, and then together we shared all of the production work. So putting it all together, these are called in papers. You know, we did this, and we turned over like a finished PDF file, basically over to the publisher. They sent it to the printer, and then I worked with the printer to make sure it was correct. And there was a printer, it was actually printed in China. So I was on the phone with like the printer in China, like 1 o'clock in the morning for us, being like, yeah, this is what I need, and this is what I want. Like, because they were asking about little stuff like these things here, and, you know, what kind of binding did we want, you know, all that stuff. So with this, it was a little different. It was mostly just me and my buddy, and that was it. Now, normally, let's say with this one, right? So Superman's more recent. It's a little bit more of a higher, like with this priority, right? Because Superman, you know, which is like for DC Comics, which is who I work for pretty much exclusively at this point. So I write the script, I give it to the artist. The artist's name is Jamal. He lives in Canada. And so he draws everything that's inside here. And then it's put together by a team of people. So there's a letter, I don't remember where she lives, but there's a production team, like a whole team of people down in Burbank, California, and they put it all together. The editor, they read it, the publisher, because of Superman is like a million cooks in the kitchen in a way. Like so many people to look at it before it goes to the door. With that one's a little different. With this one, I'm like a little bit more hands-off at times, you know, but yeah, so the editor, they're also like our project manager. They're also our like assembly line watcher. They're making sure that all these things kind of keep moving the way the train keeps moving. Because like I write the script, the artist does it, then there's a person called a letterer, then there's a designer, then that's production and printing. So we have a person who works for DC, who also lives here in Portland because people in comics are everywhere. just keeps an eye on every step of the process until it comes out, and then I get a copy of it in the mail. They give me a big box of it. Yeah. What was your question?
So if you write the dialogue and you send it to the artist, I mean, obviously you give them some kind of hint of what you want, but what if they send you back something and you really just, it's not what you wanted?
It depends. I mean, this is what we were kind of talking with the kids about. Like, it's almost like a weird game of telephone, right? Like, you know, because there are different steps of the process. Sometimes it does happen where I'll write the script and then it comes back and doesn't reflect the script. One of the things that I learned early on, and this is what I was teaching the kids earlier, is that like, if I didn't put it in the script, if I didn't leave a note there, that kind of meant that the artist is sort of, they're just going to interpret what I'm saying, right? And so they're going to interpret it their way, but if I didn't put it in the description, that means it's not going to be there. So like for the kids today, and I used to teach kids classes all over Oregon like a long time ago for this stuff, but one of the things I'll give as an example. There was this kid one time and he wrote his comic, had a monster in it, and then someone was going to draw it for him. And the other kid started drawing the monster for his story. And the other kid was like, oh, I wanted my monster to have horns. And the kid was like, well, you didn't tell me that. Like, you can't find me. So when you're working with the artist, you got to give as much information as you can. You don't want to go nuts, give too much info, but it is a partnership and it's communication. You know, it's about being open to talk about ideas and things. If you build a good relationship with that person, if it comes back and if it doesn't help the story, that's always what you're trying to do. You're always trying to be clear and concise with the story you're telling. Like a lot of times I noticed a lot with my job recently with other comic book writers, they forget you're trying to tell a story. You know, at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? You're trying to tell a story, you have something you want to say. So the art comes back and it hurts that, you have to tell them. You know, you got to say, hey, listen, that's not telling a story, right? At the end of the day, that's always your goal. You're trying to tell a story, you're trying to say something. So anything that gets in the way of that, you should be able to say. And if you have a good relationship with that artist, you can say, hey, listen, this is not reflecting what was in the script. This happens all the time, trust me, all the time. Sometimes it doesn't, you know, like with this book, with this one here, the artist and I, we just clicked really well. Like, but I've also been doing this a long time, and I always make sure that I give as much information as I can, but I also leave it open for them to also be creative and to have use their imagination. But you know, a lot of the stuff in here is exact, or they take it to like another level. You know, they add to it and it helps the story, then that's great. If it takes away, that's difficult. But this one I got lucky with. You know, the artist and I got along really well, and they just knocked it out. Like, it was really, really easy. Every once in a while on these, like with this one, and sometimes because of language barrier stuff, that can be hard. So I'll give you this example. This happened to me one time where I was doing a comic book that took place in space, and then in the descriptions I wrote, you know, there should be stars behind them. To me, I meant space, like space with stars, right? You know, like, but there was a language issue. So when the artist got it, either him or his translator, they ran it through, he thought I meant literal stars, like drawings of stars. And so there was, when the art came back, it was a person standing there with like giant drawings of stars, like not a sky with stars, but like a painted wall. And one time another writer told me where he got, in his script, he wrote, let's see if I can give you an example of this. He wrote, okay, so this has a lot of dialogue on it. So these are called balloons. They're called word balloons, right? Mm-hmm. He wrote, word balloons. He wrote, you know, Batman is standing there. Make sure to leave room for the balloons, which I write now, I mean, make sure to leave room for the dialogue. So you leave room for the dialogue on the sides. It's funny, whenever you're watching a movie or a TV show that you really love, every once in a while, if you pause the screen, especially if a person's talking, you notice the director leaves a lot of room on the sides. It's almost like they're leaving the space there for the dialogue, even the dialogue isn't there. I find this is really, really fascinating when I'm watching television shows, that even though there isn't going to be word balloons there, there's always room. And part of it's because I think the way our minds translate space, you know, like when you're watching, you guys ever seen Harry Met Sally? Harry Met Sally? Beginning of that movie is a couple sitting there with the couch, and it's kind of a long, it's called eye level shot. So it's almost like you're looking right at them, you know? If you notice in that shot, there's always like room around them. You could probably fill that in with the dialogue they're saying at the same time. I always find it fascinating with movies and television having more room for dialogue than comic books do every once in a while. Like in this shot right here, like I could not fit anything else in here. But in that comic, when he said leave room for the balloons, the artist drew a ton of balloons, like actual birthday balloons in the background. So that's a language thing. So you gotta say, hey, I didn't mean actual balloons, just erase those, you know? Once you build a good relationship with the team, you start to get to know each other, and you get to know each other's like ticks and style stuff. Like the artist on this, he started learning really quickly that almost all my books open the same, which is something we can talk about. Like when I'm obsessed with storytelling, is openings and endings. I always find how people choose to start their story, how you choose to end your story, very interesting. And we were talking about it a little before. I think it's always very telling about a writer where they choose to open and where they choose to end. It's one of my favorite like parts of storytelling. So like here, I always start with 4 panels stacked. Almost every book I do has that pretty much. It's because I think it's the best way to bring your reader in. But yeah, when I'm talking about storytelling with people, especially comic books in particular, because these are shorter, very much shorter, I always ask them, how does it start? How does it end? What's your first page? What's that first line of dialogue? I think about that a lot with novels too, and I think predominantly everyone's here writing novels. One of the things that I do when it comes to novels, any kind of storytelling really, I'm always fascinated by this. Like I'll be in a bookstore and I'll just grab a random book off the shelf and I'll just read the first line, because that's your introduction to everything. Right? It's everything you're bringing this person into your story is that first line. That is one of those like first impressions, right? To me, that first page, that first line of dialogue says so much about your story. Like you grab any book off the shelf and you have to think about this person went through so many drafts of this book. They went through editorial notes, went through everything. What do they land on was the first thing they wanted to say in their story? And a lot of times the first thing they say in some way shapes everything else after that. And same thing with the ending. Whenever people are writing comics, I always ask them this, and it drives some of my peers crazy. What is your ending? How does it end? Do you know the ending? And with comics, what's your last page? When I was talking to the kids about this, and I'll bring this up, there are 2 examples. Does anybody here know a joke? Just a joke. Serious.
Where do whales go to get their teeth straightened?
Where?
The orthodontist.
Orthodontist. I love it. All right, awesome. So that's the beginning. That's funny. The kid this morning, it was like, where do fish keep their money? And it was the riverbank. That was her joke. But I always love that because it's like beginning and end. That's all it is, right? And that's what storytelling is a lot of ways. It's like set up and then punchline, right? Like jokes. Has everyone here watched Twilight Zone? Right, well, watch Twilight Zone. Awesome. Twilight Zone is great. I think Twilight Zone is one of the best teaching tools you can have for writing of any kind. Like Sterling had it down. He understood setup, middle, and end. It was always the same with every episode, right? It was always like set up this character and this kind of mystery, and it was always an ending that was like a punch in the gut, right? Like it's always, I think one of the most classic Twilight Zone is the guy who just wanted to find time to read, right? That's all he cared about was finding time to read. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not just saying this. Twilight Zone. Yes. Twilight Zone episode. Very beginning of the episode, this guy who works at a library. All he wants is to read. He can't. He's too busy. All he wants is to read. That's page 1. We know this, right? The beginning of the story is all he wants to do is read. He locks himself in the bank. It was a bank. So he locks himself in the bank safe. And what happens? Nuclear war happens. And when he gets out of the safe, because he's safe, because he was in the safe, when he gets out, the world is over. But he now has all the time in the world to read books. So he got what he wanted, right? So he goes to the library and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. I have all the time in the world. All I want to do is read books. And then he accidentally drops his glasses and he breaks his glasses. And
it's coming back to
right? And that thing of like, no. And he's sitting there on the steps and he's like, all I want to do is read. I can't read anymore. I love it. I feel like it's one of the best examples of what I'm talking about, where it's like, you establish early what your character's about, what they want, what their needs are. The middle is sort of like what's called the fun and games, right? The middle of the story, and then the ending is always this punch in the gut. That's a bad example in terms of like, sometimes you want a happy ending. That's an ending that's like how Twilight Zone was always really good at like these like darker endings. They're always like a little punch in the gut. That's how I think about it with comics a lot of times too. Is you want to have the setup, the middle, and then you have the ending. It's a little bit of a punch in the gut, because in comic books, because these periodicals, there's no such thing as a third act for the most part. It's always like rising danger or something new information. But yeah, when I'm writing, when I'm talking to other writers, I always ask, how do you open, how do you end? Because it's one of the things I find the most fascinating about different writers is because not everybody can start. We were talking about before. Not every book can start within the beginning, right? Like if you're doing a memoir or telling a story about somebody's life, you could all start the day they were born if you wanted, but is that the most interesting place to start for that person? You kind of jump around. What is that opening scene? What is that first thing that you want to like grab someone's attention with, right out the gate? Because, you know, I think it's especially true now, like, you know, we all have some variation of short attention spans. So if you're not going to grab that person the first few pages, you know, they're going to go read something else. They're going to check something else out. And then in comics, it's weird because they're periodical. And my goal is to make you to want to read the next one, the next month. I always end on cliffhangers. So I always end on like a shocking twist or new information or the character's in danger, right? It's always like one of those things somewhere or form. Because I want you to come back the next month, right? I always want to end on some kind of jump scare. But so yeah, when I'm talking to people, I'm always like, what's that thing that when I get to the ending, I'm like, oh my God, that's awesome, I'm gonna keep reading. It's the same thing with chapters, you know, like, isn't it annoying when you're reading a novel and it's really late at night and you're like, I want to put this book down, it's getting late. It's in the chapter and then it's like, oh no, this is happening. You're like, I have to keep reading. I gotta read the next chapter. That's the best. That's the best. That's good writing. If you get to the end of each chapter, you're like, I have to start the next chapter right now. You know, that's when you know that book is good. You know, I read a book. I'm not gonna say what book it was. I read a book one time. I read a book. I read a book, and I remember when I got to the end, I could not stop reading it. I couldn't stop reading it. Like every chapter, I was like, oh, I gotta read more. I gotta read more. I actually flew to Paris while I was reading it, right on the plane. And whenever I had like, you know, I was trying to get over my jet lag in Paris, I was like, I'm gonna read this book. Couldn't sleep. I kept reading it. And I got to the ending, and I was like, this is the best, worst book I've ever read, because the story was ridiculous, the ending was ridiculous, but I couldn't stop reading it because it was so compelling, and every chapter ended in a way that made me want to go, okay, I have to find out what happened. And I think that's something, so it's always
what
like—
made it the worst?
What's that?
What made it a worst? What is the worst component?
The worst components of it was the story was really shallow. You know, it was like the hero just kept getting what they wanted. You know, like it was too easy. There was no real challenge. You know, you read those books where it's like the main characters happen to be good at everything they do, and then you get to the ending and you're like, where was the drama here? You know, but it made me want to read all the way through. But you're just like, it's weird. It was a book where the hero won.
The writing then versus the subject matter is what I'm hearing.
It's complicated because I feel like it was a weird thing where I was like, by the time I got to the ending, I was like, I read this whole book, so I must have been engaged by it. I must have been engaged, obviously. But when I got to the ending, I was like, all right, cool.
But you were locked in a safe.
No, if I was like, yeah, no, what is the thing? That's the book I was gonna read. Yeah. Well, we keep talking about other questions you have about writing, right?
Ron has one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ron? We can't hear you.
Oh, what venue? I saw that question. What? There's a question up on the screen.
Yeah, that was Mary earlier.
Oh, Mary, awesome. Yeah, I can answer that one. Did you say somebody else had a question?
Looks like Ron's got his hand up.
Yeah, sure.
It isn't.
I'll answer both.
Maybe answer Mary. I'm not sure if Ron knows his hands up.
Oh, okay. I'll answer Mary's question. I can't hear you, Mary, but I can read your question.
Okay, great.
Oh, I can hear you a little bit.
All right, now I can.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right. So what venue did I piss out my Kinko's comics at? I mean, I wouldn't call Kinko's comics. That was a joke name for them. But for me, predominantly, I would do it at San Diego Comic-Con, actually, down in California. I grew up in California, so I would go down there and I would have my backpack. I would just hand them out to people, either people I knew or to editors. You know, I'd go over and I knew what books they made. That was always a key part. Was that like, you know, I would just hand them to random people. It was like, oh, this is an editor who worked on something I liked. So that was. It also showed me that I like working with them, right? They've made things that I like. It's better to do that. You know, have some knowledge of who you're talking to. But yeah, I would hand them out predominantly at San Diego Comic-Con, mostly little comic conventions down in California. I would wait in line for these editors, and I would walk over and I say, this is who I am. Here's my book. I get to them. I will tell you the truth. Every once in a while, they would literally throw it in the trash after that. I saw this happen. It would happen. It was all right. This is part of writing, is knowing that there is a good chance you might turn a manuscript in and they might literally just throw it in the trash. I watched this happen. One of my closest friends, his name is Scott Snyder. He's a comic book writer. He wrote a comic with Stephen King. He was actually Stephen King's son's roommate in college, one of his sons. And so when he was doing a couple early comics, one of the earliest ones he did was a book called American Vampire. You You can probably check it out here.
We have it now.
Yeah, it's a very good comic book, right? So he wrote the main part of it, and then the backups were written by Stephen King. That's a big deal, right? It was one of the first times Stephen King ever worked at a comic book. And my buddy, this is back in 2010, this was his first like big comic book. It was his first big comic. And it really kicked off his whole career. Like he's wrote Batman for a really long time, and he's very successful now, but that first one. And he always has this story he tells, and I've seen variations of it, but his is one of the hardest, was we were at a convention in Chicago. They were giving it away. So his very first issue was a small one like this. They were giving them away to people. So anybody that came up, you can get a free comic book, free comic. And he was so excited. At the end of the day, he saw all those free comics in the trash. Trash on the ground, ripped up, stomped on, in the gutter, everything. Because it was devalued, it was a free thing. It's like if you're walking to the grocery store and they hand you a free thing, you're not going to pay. It's free, it's lost value. And so it was almost like a humbling moment for him in a way, where it really showed him like, it was just humbling of like, you might put your love into this, and so you might not care about it. But after that one day was really hard. But after that, he blew up after that. He took on writing Batman. That book actually won a bunch of awards, so it did really well, but it was almost like a humbling kind of moment for him in the beginning. But yeah, I would just walk around conventions and I would hand my books to people and talk to them, and gradually, and it was also a learning experience for me, because I would show it to people. I think one of the best ways, and this is something we were talking before everyone got here, the best way to learn how to do it is by doing it, and so you might have moments where there are books that you might make that never come out. You might have books that you make that never see light of day. A lot of my really, really early work, a lot of my really early comics are things that got put in a drawer, or things I might have done like a little bit of and then never showed anybody else, but it helped me to learn. And then gradually the work got better, and then I was able to start publishing. And that's what I was saying, at this point, I've easily made like about 150 graphic novels at this point. But it took me a minute to get there, like even when I was going through some of my own like files, I found some old stuff that I made that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm glad that never came out. Because it was like me figuring it out, it's all about getting it out there on paper and then showing it to people. You're gonna get feedback. I imagine that's what you guys do here. You write a little bit and you show it to each other or share it with each other. You might, get feedback that you don't want to hear, but you might learn something from it too, and then just keep getting better. Was there other question? Did you also have questions up here?
I don't think so.
No, okay. You have a question?
Yeah. So you can write a Superman book because you work for DC Comics, right?
Yeah. So
but presumably one of us can't. And how does that work?
Yes. So, well, yes and no. So DC owns Superman, right? And so they're the only ones that are allowed to make DC Comics for sale. If you, so for example, when those kids were in here, nothing could stop them from writing like a little superhero comic for themselves. The only reason that DC would ever get technical on you about that is you're trying to sell it. Like if you were handing it out, but for the most part, you probably shouldn't do that. I recommend you make your own stuff. I feel like when it comes to contributing to like the world, when it comes into new narratives, I always recommend people do their own thing. Like that's what I did. I did a lot of create your own books, like this called the Nail Biter book. I had a book like Ghosted, Birthright. I did all those. Those are all stories that I made up on myself. It actually helped me more as a writer. When it came to Superman and Batman and Robin and those books, those are called work for hire. And yeah, you get paid really good money to do it, but you will not own it afterwards. Like you were giving them that story. They're paying you for it, but then you're sort of like, it is not yours. It's not your baby. It is their baby. You're like, you're babysitting, more or less, right? That's obviously you're a shepherd for the moment. That is not your flock, right? That is somebody else's. Yeah,
so how does it work? Sorry. How does it work if you want to write a story where you have a kid who's dressing up as Superman and thinks he's Superman?
I think you get away with that in some cases. I know people that do that. You can kind of touch it and go with it. It just depends, really. But I've had friends that have done stories like that. What's really weird is you almost don't say the word Superman. You say superhero. And I think you can go with it. But again, it gets a little tricky. So for me, when I was a kid, I really wanted to write for DC Comics. That was like one of my goals. I want to do my own thing, but I was like, I want to write Superman. I want to write Batman. I want to work for Marvel too. I want to write X-Men, Spider-Man, all that. But to get there, I had to do all the stuff by myself and make these kinds of books. Then eventually DC read these books and they hired me to write those. That's how I got those jobs. So you're asking me about that. It's like, well, if you do want to write a Superman story, you could get paid for it. You just have to pitch it. You know, it's almost like anything. You pitch a story, they say yes or no. You know, they might give you notes. The chances of getting no are way higher than getting a yes, to be honest with you. I'm sure you all know that.
It's actually a great thing because usually you get total silence.
Yeah, oh yeah, total silence is hard. I mean, listen, if you want to talk about total silence, we can talk about that. It gets hard. I mean, you have to like humanize the editors a little bit. You know, I have editors I know who are getting pitched stories by like, you know, hundreds of people, and it's hard to say no to everybody. And it can also be, I have some friends, I have a lot of friends actually who are editors, and they always say it's the hardest part of their job to tell people no. Because it is hard. It is hard to tell somebody no, but when you get to that many people, sometimes silence is the no, which is hard to hear, but there is something about it because they didn't find compelling or engaging emailing back. It's like the no, the silence is almost the note. When I was doing this book, Nail Biter, I actually had pitched it to multiple publishers and got no's. I pitched it to DC. They had a brand, an imprint called Vertigo. It was very popular. Like the Sandman comics came through that. You saw a show on Netflix that was on there. A Preacher that was part of the Vertigo imprint. I pitched to them twice, and one time I pitched to them, they had some notes, and I was like, "Great, I did it," and they said no. And then almost 1 year to the day, they were like, "We know we're going to revisit it," and I was like, "Great," and they said no again. They literally went through it again, the whole process over again. They said no. I went to Dark Horse, I went to a couple of different places, or they would want to change it so much that I was like, that is no longer my story. It is becoming your story, and I wasn't interested in that. But my gut kept telling me this is a story that I had to tell. This was my story. I knew it would be successful. I felt it, you know. And then we published it, and it did really, really well. We finally did it through Image, which is also a local publisher. They're like, you could arguably say they're the third largest comics publisher in the United States. And it worked out really, really well. That was one of the best because, you know, a lot of times you're doing books through publishers, sometimes they own a piece of it. They own a piece of that property with you. You share the copyright or you share ownership of it. With this, I own it all by myself. It's just me and the artist that own it. Nobody else owns it. We don't share any kind of ownership rights. The publisher, they just published it. It's one of the best deals you can get in comics. What was your question?
Well, I have two questions now. So that was self-published.
No, so it's weird. No, so this one, so Image is, again, they're one of the largest comic publishers in the United States. But Image was a publisher. How do I explain this? It was made by a bunch of creators. So, you know, like DC Comics has been around for 85 years, almost 90 years, right? I think next year is the 90th anniversary of DC Comics. It is owned by Warner Brothers. So it's owned by a humongous conglomerate. You know, Marvel has been publishing almost as long, right? They're owned by Disney, huge conglomerate. So in the early 90s, there were a bunch of artists. There were 7 artists. They all worked for Marvel. They were like rock star artists in the early 90s. They were the best of the best. And one day they went to Marvel and they said, we're leaving. They all quit on the same day. They were unhappy. They didn't like that someone else was owning all this work they were doing. You know, they were selling millions of copies of comics. They felt like they didn't have control or ownership of what they were creating. It's like one of those guys created the character Venom. You know, if you guys know who Deadpool is, one of those guys created Deadpool. They had created a lot of stuff that now is like super popular. They don't own any of it. And so they created all this stuff for Marvel and for DC, like even Superman, like, you know, these people, they gave it up to them. In some cases, they got money for it later. Then, you know, it's these 7 artists in the early 90s. They all quit at the same time. They're like, we're out. They went to DC and they said, we're out. We're not working for you ever again, which wasn't true. They all worked there again, eventually, almost all of them. But they were like, I'm out. I'm not doing this. And then they went and they started a publishing company called Image. And the whole point of that was you go through the same process. Like you pitch them a story, they say yes or no, they offer support, they help you with marketing, printing, you know, production, a lot of that stuff. But at the end, you own it at the end. You own that story. So that's what the biggest difference is. So it's not like self-publishing. You do a lot of work yourself though, but it is having that support that you would get from a publisher. They don't own it at the end, you know? So, but different publishers are different, you know? Like some book publishers will be like, you own the copyright, but we own the media rights. So it's like, you get to be in control of the story and the published material, but they get to sell it to say Netflix or a movie or a TV show. You'll get a cut of it, but they are in charge of it. So
do they own any part of it? Like, do they own the cover?
Nothing. I mean, I have a really good relationship with them, so I'll continue working with them. But I have seen this where it's like, there was a book maybe 10 years ago with that Image, and they were unhappy with whatever, you know, something happened or they're unhappy. They took it to Dark Horse, which is also a local publisher there in Milwaukee. They took it to Dark Horse, and Dark Horse started publishing it for a few years. and then they decided to take it back. You know, it's interesting how you can do that in comics, but it all depends on the publisher and really what you want. You know, like in some cases, you know, so it's weird. It's like what you're willing to give up, right? So with this publisher, they're also an Image, but they're an imprint called Skybound. Now, I went to them and I said, I want to do this book. It's going to be, you know, 10 volumes long, which is a lot for a comic. 10 volumes is a lot. And I was like, I'll do 10 volumes of this. So they gave me an advance per volume, right? So they gave me an advance per volume, but in exchange for certain rights, right? They got some stuff back in return, so like the media, all that. It depended on what I wanted to do at the time. With this, I didn't get any advance. So I almost did this for free. But it wasn't for free because the ending, when I got the royalties, I got all those royalties. Nobody else gets them. So yeah, it ended up being a good amount of money. I always joke with this where it's like, if I wasn't married with children, I wouldn't need to work because just the royalties on this one book. But because we have kids and I want to take care of my family, I do other jobs. I could sit on my butt playing video games forever, pretty much. If all I wanted to do was just do this, but that is not the reality.
Most publishers claim part of the royalties, or at least most of it. Most of the royalties. Not with these. That's one of the beautiful parts of it. Yeah, so they get a little percentage of the trades, these collections. They get a percentage, but it is small. You really get into the grand scheme. I mean, it's tiny. It's really great. I mean, Image is probably one of the best publishers you can ever work for, if it's yours, you know, for comics. But it depends on what your needs are, you know? So it's like, I work a lot with DC Comics. So I'll create something in one of these books. So for example, when I was doing this book called Robin, which is like, he's the son of Batman in this one, right? Yeah, so he's Bruce Wayne's son. Yeah, he's got a teenage son. His name is Damian. It's very fun. It's one of my favorite characters. He's a little jerk, he's a little brat, but I love him. So for example, in this book, I'll give you this example here at the ending. So I created this character for this book. Her name is Flatline, right? They actually own that character. So I created it, but they own it. But I can file for something called character equity agreement. So I'll say like make a video game, a toy. I get a percentage of that, but it's small. But it depends on what you're interested in, what you want, you know. And sometimes for me, doing work for hire jobs, it's like doing commercial jobs, you know. But I still really love it, and it's really fun to do. So I put as much, you know, of it as I can in there. But they pay me really well, so I'm not really like too much. But for me personally, I try to balance it out between what I'll say is commercial work for hire work, and then the creator-owned work, the stuff that's for me, you know. And a lot of times you're a little bit more like we were talking before. This is a horror book, you know. It's a little different from these. Like a teenager could read this and be okay. A teenager could read this. I'd be hesitant to give it to them. I'd be like, your parents could give you this, it'd be fine. I would not hand it to a kid. I definitely had moments where I've had to be like, no. Like, you know, when I do conventions and stuff. But yeah, what was your other good questions? Well, excuse me. The other question is, you do these for hire for DC Comics. Do you get an assignment, like, because they do these like every month? So do you have like an assignment or
it depends.
A period that you're supposed to do a story and then somebody else does another story for?
So I'm in a different situation than a lot of creators. So in some instances, you know, the editor will have an idea for a concept and he'll go out to writers. You know, he's like, oh, I want to do a book about Superboy. You know, he's like, we want to do a Superboy in space story. So he'll go out to writers and like, are you interested in writing a story about Superboy in space? And the writer will say yes or no. Yeah, I'd love to do that. You know, here's my pitch. Here's my outline for it. And then the editor will go through and kind of do it. I'm at a stage, and I've always kind of been this way somewhere or another. I don't need anybody else to give me ideas. I have like way too many ideas at this point. I have notebooks upon notebooks full of ideas. So DC rarely approaches me with any ideas. But so for example, last year I did a really big book for DC that was pretty much my idea. He has a copy of it over here. I wrote this really big book for them. And so I'll give you some different examples. So I wrote this book. It was called Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's like a sequel to a really big book that DC did in the 80s. So I wrote this. When I was in the middle of this, I thought I was going to write a book about the Justice League on the other side of it. So I was like, I have some ideas for Justice League. I always wanted to write it. I wasn't sure if I was the right choice for it, but I had some ideas and I could do it. In the middle of this, while I was working on it, before it came out, the editor came to me and he was like, he was my editor on Robin. And he was like, you're not going to do Justice League. They're like, we're not giving you Justice League. And I was like, what do you want us to do instead of Justice League then? He was like, we really want you to do Superman. So what he said to me is, as the example, he's like, we want to hear what you want to do with Superman. And he was like, all I want you to do is, if you're going to do Superman, is just tell a really clean, like down-to-earth story with Superman. No, I was already kind of on the same page. He was like, no aliens, no space, no multiverse, just Clark Kent as Superman. Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, the Daily Planet, that's all I want you to do. So I took my notebook, and I was familiar with the kids too. I had this notebook, the Daily Planet notebook. It's got a Superman logo in and everything. And I started writing out my ideas for the book. And so I was showing this to the kids earlier. I wrote this is the first thing I started off with was tone. Like what I want the tone to be. So I literally wrote, I wrote Spielberg. I really like Steven Spielberg. And I think Steven Spielberg works really well with sentiment, right? Like a lot of his work revolves around sentiment or family in some way or another. I was like, that's the kind of tone I want. I want to feel like that. Where it's like, yeah, there's these big spectacular challenges, but at the end of the day, it is about family for him a lot of times. Look at Jaws. Jaws, it's about a big shark. Not really. It's about this dude and his family. Like the best scenes of that movie are him playing with his kids. But I wrote fun. I wrote mystery. I wrote twists. I wrote new. I wrote escapism, which is words. Just things for me to kind of get my head around it. And then I wrote a list of characters that I wanted to use and some different ideas. And I wrote things I didn't want to do, and I kind of got in here. And then I started figuring it all out. And I started writing out, like, I want to use Lex Luthor. I love Lex Luthor. Okay, so what am I going to do differently with Lex Luthor? And I started writing some different ideas out. And then I went to them and I said, here's my story. Here's what I'm going to do. And then we did that. They had a couple notes. So it's a little bit different. Like they didn't come to me and go, here's your assignment, do this. It's a little different for me at this stage because I have way too many ideas. Like I don't need Star Wars. We're talking Star Wars is like Luke Skywalker living on Tatooine in this desert planet. He hates it. He feels like he's meant for something bigger. He is special. He feels that I'm special. And everyone keeps telling him he's not, right? So his Uncle Owen is like, no, here's the farmer. And here's the farmer. Everybody's like, no, here's the kid. Here's the dumb kid. Han Solo, here's the dumb kid. Middle part of the movie is him learning all this stuff about himself. The ending, he saves the day. He saves the Death Star, right? Everything. I know. Help me out. Is the ending proves that he's meant for something bigger too close to the Death Star, and now he's going to go on this big adventure. But it was this whole thing, right? It was like the very beginning, I remember something bigger. I wasn't telling him not. In the middle is him learning, and then there's ups and downs, obviously. Like with Obi-Wan dying, all these different things happen. But the ending, he learned something. And he is meant for something bigger. A lot of stories always come down to that. They want something in the beginning, you can't have it. The middle is them working to get that thing, and either they don't get it, or whatever. But they learn something in the process. That's always almost everything. So sometimes that's me sitting there. What does my character want at the ending? They get it, they not. The comics, a lot of times, they don't get it in the ending because you want that person again to read the next issue, And then we always have that thing where there's rules that Pixar has. Pixar talks a lot about this, where it's like you appreciate more when the hero doesn't get what they want than they do get it. You want to watch them work for it. We were talking before about throwing scripts in the trash or throwing books in the trash. So Pixar is a true thing. Pixar will actually make the movie 3 times. So, or more than that, but 3 times is like the average. A lot of them will do is they do things called animatics. So they'll take their script, they hire a storyboard artist, they do really loose drawing with their storyboard. And then what they do is they take it and they animate the storyboards and they use their own voices. Like the animators, the director, right, use their own voices to kind of fill it in. And then they watch the animatic of it, right? They watch the animatics. It's almost like they actually get to see the movie where it's like a super rough, like very loose, like sketch art version of it. And they can actually watch it. Not even if they watch it and they go, this sucks, or let's start over. And they do this multiple times on every movie. It's really fascinating to go and watch a lot of these documentaries about making, say, Little Mermaid or making Frozen or any one of these. Like they make it multiple times, and then they go back and they start over. And a lot of them, they don't really know what the movie is about until they get to the end, and then they work their way backwards. There's a thing that Pixar says, like you never know what the theme of your story is until you get the ending, and then you start rewriting. You go back to the beginning and rewrite it. So much of writing is rewriting and editing
it can be annoying at times. It really is, you know. But there are times, I mean, when I was working on this book here, one of the things was I felt like it was coming across way too much like science and science. I was repeating it. You know, I was doing like a remake of this thing I love versus the original. And even when it was being rejected by the publishers, I couldn't find what that thing was to make it different. And so I kept rewriting it until I finally figured out what it was going to be. And that ended up being like a big twist on the story. I think made it different from a lot of other serial killer stories. And I think I'll make it successful. I only got to that story piece by constantly going back to the well and trying to figure out what was working and being okay with doing things in track. One of the things I talk about with the kids and with anybody that's writing and trying to be creative, when you're in that rough stage where just you and your notebook, one of the worst things you can do is think about what other people are going to think about you, right? The only audience your book has at the moment is you. It's just you. And so your goal should be, would I be entertained by this? If I was reading this, would I like it? Because if you don't like it, I mean, that's bad. That's the worst you can get to. I've been there. I made books where acting and I was like, I do not like this. And that will never happen again. But I've done it. Yeah, go ahead.
Are any of your serial killers based on real?
No, but yes, I mean, it was weird with this one. So I did a lot of research on serial killers I'm working on. You know, a lot of documentaries, a lot on website. It was rough. It was rough. And at the end, I decided there might be some thematic things that were in common, you know, or things that I might absorb from it. But at the same time, you know, a lot of stuff that all have the same patterns too. So it was like, how do I make it weirder and different, you know, like make it, you look at like horror movies, you know, you have like Freddy, Jason, you have Jigsaw from Saw, like you have all these different killers. Look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Like the Chainsaw Massacre is based on a technique, right? It was like he saw someone go around and on the dude, and then he blew it up as being totally, right? He made a completely different story, but it was based on the original. Like he fictionalized it like crazy, and that's what you get. You know, instead of being one person that was like a fan, but he really got a lot of stuff from the stuff he was about that game, and then he made it into a fantastic thing, and that's what you can do. And particularly with this, like this isn't a trial. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be so real that it wasn't even was writing about, you know. So I tried something different. But yeah.
Which one do you want?
Yeah.
I read Birthright. I enjoyed it.
So,
kind of cool. The beginning, right, is a family like moment, right? There's some family drama. It's a little bit. I don't really have a question, other than it's like Amulet kind of starts like that. Really draws you in, right? Like this huge tragedy inside this family. It just drives the rest of the story.
You know, we were talking about this before about beginnings, and it is a trick. It's a trick. I'm gonna tell you a trick about beginning. All right. You want to start in a place that's relatable. You want to start in a place that everyone's been. Let me ask this question. Why do you think there are so many TV shows that take place in high school? Like, why are there so many TV shows that take place in high school?
Because we all had that experience.
We all had that experience. It's the last thing that all of us have in common, no matter what. Most of us, right? Like almost everyone went to high school. Not everyone's been to a wedding, right? Not everyone's been to a funeral. You know, so where do you start? What's something that you know a lot of people start at? We all went through high school, we all had high school experience, so we can all relate to it. So it's one of the easiest things for TV people to pitch is the high school show. And so most high school shows are almost the same in a weird way. Especially lately, it's like, it's the rich kids at high school. Like so many other shows have become that in a weird way, but it's because of what we all relate to. One of the greatest movies of all time. The greatest movies of all time is what? Godfather. How does The Godfather open? Where is it at? Where's The Godfather at? It's at a wedding.
A wedding.
It's a wedding. Why is that? Because we've all been to a wedding before, right? We've all been to a wedding, we know that kind of environment, but then you're seeing something that is behind the scenes of a wedding, right? Like, we've all been there, we know the part where the singing, the dancing, the big picture, all that happens in the first 40 minutes of that movie is this whole wedding sequence. But then you're brought behind closed doors to this wedding, right? You're brought in there to watch the, you know, watch the family drama going on behind the scenes at a wedding, and they add all this like context, and you're almost like the way that the opening shot is, it's like you're a guest at that wedding in a way, and you're being brought behind closed doors. And so a lot of times when I'm opening stories up, I do try to find ways to sometimes cheat and start with something that is familiar. So in this, Birthright opens with the father and son playing catch. You know, like for the most part, you understand that. Even if you haven't experienced it, you understand it. Like you could kind of like, okay, cool. And you're starting at a more human level. When it comes to like fantasy stories, there is this saying, it is the, so I get this right, the bigger the story, so I get this right. I used to say this all the time, now I'm forgetting what the whole thing is. Yeah, it's like, oh, I got it right now, okay. The smaller the story, the bigger the world, the smaller the story, right? So I'll give you some examples with this. If you know you're going to do something fantastic, you know it's going to be this crazy, fantastic thing, you have to give the audience something normal. Because if you don't give them something normal, the fantastic doesn't matter. If it's all fantastic all the time, then it doesn't matter, right? It almost gets lost. You want to bring it down to a human level. So this is why I'm going to bring it back to Star Wars. Obviously, Star Wars starts off with like a giant space battle, right? But then what is that? It's a kid on a farm. You know, yeah, he's on an alien world. But for the most part, you understand kid on farm once you get off that farm. That is essentially the beginning of Star Wars. Everything is about that. And so when I was doing this, it was, I'm going to do this big, fantastic story with monsters and swords and all this stuff. But I started off with family, an actual real family drama, which is this father and son playing catch, and then the kid goes missing. And while they're playing catch in the woods. And so it's very much a relatable. Like you could feel that, and then it pulls up from there. Yeah, it's a big, fantastic thing with monsters and all this stuff, but you start off in a very small place first. You just kind of tell. Even when you look at something like Lord of the Rings, I mean, it's a birthday party. A lot of stuff is about they're getting ready for a birthday party that day, and then it starts to go and build from there. You know, and he's telling you like, oh, the One Ring rules all this crazy stuff that happens. But really, once the story starts going, it centers around the planning his birthday party, you know, and not wanting his relatives to come over, and he's like kind of weird about the birthday party thing, but a lot of that stuff starts there. And so whenever I'm starting stories off, I sometimes, not always, I try to start at a very human place first. You know, you don't have to be explosions all the time. You want to start someplace small. Even if you do like a cold open, you know, I love cold opens in any kind of fiction, movie, television, novel, whatever. You know what cold open is? You ever watch a TV show and like, you ever watch Law and Order? You think it's usually whatever happens before the credit starts, right? Like they'll introduce something. So I'll give you an example. Let me see if I can give you an example, a good example of a cold open. So this is not a best example of cold open, but I'll give you this because all my books, for the most part, have cold open. So this one, the Superman book, the opening is about it's Clark Kent when he's a kid. He's living on the farm with his parents. This again, me starting things in a really grounded place. I'll show you two examples. Here, he's listening to loud music and his parents are yelling at him. Right? We all kind of understand that. Yeah, it's a Superman story, but that's a very human, relatable story. Mom and Pop Kent, and they're yelling at Clark and playing loud music. And they start talking about, you know, Clark Kent is going to be basically Superman someday. Like he's going to have all these gifts. And a lot of people are going to be telling Clark what to do, right? Like once he becomes Superman, a lot of people are going to be telling him what to do with those powers. But he needs to listen to his own heart is sort of what it is, right? Like Pop Kent makes this little speech, and then we go, boom, big Superman logo, right? So that's called a cold open. It's like we had a little bit of taste of the story, and boom, they cut away to something even bigger. Cold. So C-O-L-D. And then Clark Kent, he's not Superman, big stuff's going on, you know, big action set piece, but it opens at a wedding as well. So we have a wedding. I'm telling you, people love it. I'm telling you, you know, you get in here, get to show some of the wedding, people relate to that, you know, so I was really hesitant to start this with a wedding, actually, because of the same reasons. I was like, you know, The Godfather opens on a wedding. And one of my favorite comics of all time was a Daredevil comic that Mark Waid wrote with an artist named Chris Somney. You probably read that one. Also opens at a wedding, so I was a little nervous having a wedding opening. But I thought, totally, if you start a funeral, that's sad. You know, it's like, I want to start with something that is joyous, and having it be a wedding where it helps the tone for the book, where it's fun, you know, it's a little silly, but it's a joyous moment, will help the tone of the rest of the book, right? And it makes it really relatable. And then having Clark Kent write a story about the wedding. But it made it fun, you know, make people happy. For the most part, weddings make people happy, so it's a good place to start if you're doing a story, where part of the tone is to be a very happy tone.
Unless you're writing Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy. Well, Grey's Anatomy is a whole other thing. Grey's Anatomy is really fascinating. They jump around a lot when they start on stuff, but yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what's going to work for what I'm writing, and you know, I always felt like it started at the right place and,
Robin, can you make sure that you speak towards the
oh, I'm sorry. I always thought that my story, I'm talking to you, but I'm basically,
Yeah,
it's funny. I always felt like I started at the wrong place, and now what you're saying is going to make me question, whether I get the right place or if I get the right mood or something. I mean, do you have to start with something joyous?
No, it could be dark too. You could literally have a moment where I would say it's about whatever you think is going to be the most compelling, bring that reader in, right? So it's like, let's say it is a joyous thing, right? I mean, these are bad examples I'm about to give you. You could have a thing on wedding. Or your first line thought it could be, this is the story of how I died. That's something you're like, I want to know, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can start a story with, my first memory was my car hitting a tree, right? It's like, oh, I want to know what happened, So it's like, it makes up, but it's really about what is your most compelling line of dialogue? What's your most compelling line? I mean, I'm always fascinated by this. Like, my wife will get a book. She gets a lot of books here. And there are times I'll have like a little stack on the dining table. I'll walk over and I'll just read the first page because I'm just super curious of like, how do they choose? Because I think it's one of the hardest parts of the job is how do you choose where you're going to start it and how you're going to end it. As I said before, it's like, and I find it always really fascinating about how do you end a story and how do you start it. You look at Lord of the Rings and it's like you get to that last one and then there's like 10 endings to it, but that was the decision they made and I think they earned it. But it's one of the complaints I always hear about the last one is like, my wife's always say the same thing. She's like, oh my God, you're in that theater for like 20 minutes for that ending. And I'm like, yeah, it works. But sometimes you get these endings that are just a few minutes long and it works. Like, what's that last visual thing, whether it's, and when I say by visual, even when you're writing with your words, what is that last visual image you want to have in their head? Has everybody read Gone Girl? Read the book Gone Girl?
Refused.
Refused it?
I didn't think it was, I didn't like it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
It's dark, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. It's
pretty dark, but not that.
See, it was one of my favorite books. I remember reading that. I had no idea what it was about though. So that's part of me. When I got to the middle, I was like, oh, they got me. Right. So not to get spoilers. That book opens with him looking at the back of his wife's head, right? And he's looking at her head and he's like imagining what it would be like to smash her head in. So it's definitely a dark book. But the beginning of that book is him looking at the back of her head and then she turns around and looks at him. The end of the book is him laying in bed and he's looking at the back of her head again. It's like, and because it's this weird cycle, it's a weird cycle in a lot of books. But then it cuts to her and she's like, I have to have the last word. And, it's a good book. You should try it. I think it's definitely darker, but you should try it.
There's times when I've gone to post a book on Goodreads and realized, oh my God, I read this before. I gave it a terrible rating and this time I loved it.
You know what that happens too? I think about that all the time. Brian De Palma, who's this like famous director, he made Carrie and Untouchables and a bunch of really great movies. There's a documentary that he made on Netflix. He talked about this a lot, that he wishes art of all kinds, film, television, movie, books, whatever. He wished they weren't judged so harshly in the moment. He's like, because a lot of times when you come back to things, you might judge it differently. Because a lot of times how your day was can influence a book, it can influence your opinion of something. And he was always saying he wished things were judged over time. One of the examples is always going to be John Carpenter's The Thing. It was a movie in the early 80s. When it came out, it bombed and everyone hated it. Awful reviews. Now it's considered one of the greatest horror movies of all time. People now are like, oh, that's a masterpiece. But when it came out, people were just like, this is a piece of shit. So John Carpenter's The Thing. It was an early 80s horror movie. It's a great movie. But at the time when it came out, people were like, now people are like, this is easily one of the best horror movies ever made, but it was because it was judged in the moment. I always obsess about these things. What was your question?
It's actually Mary. She had a question for you. She wanted to ask if you could say again what a cold opening is.
So cold opening is sort of just like, it's the first thing you sort of want to open up with visually. So I'll give you an example for a movie, right? Like in Inception. Have you seen the movie Inception, Mary? Okay, all right, good. So in Inception, it opens up on a beach, right? And Leonardo DiCaprio wakes up on the beach, and he's an old man, and he goes into that building, and it's like this really cool looking building, and he sits down with the other guy, and they start talking about your regrets in life, right? And then all of a sudden it cuts to something in present day, right? And that opening scene is a cold open, and then we revisit that that opening at the beginning. And what you find out was those first few minutes, you were actually getting a glimpse of something that was happening at the end. It's the same thing with another Christopher Nolan movie called The Prestige. At the beginning of The Prestige, There's just shots of a bunch of top hats in the woods. That's all it is. It's just, it opens up, like cuts, fades in from the dark, bunch of top hats in the woods. And then all of a sudden it cuts to something else in present day. And that's a cold open. And then you come back and you realize that what you just saw was important for something else later, right? So those are all called cold opens. Television does it pretty much every episode of TV you watch. You know, if you watch a sitcom, it's always like that opening little joke, and then it cuts to like the theme song. Those are cold
play mechanism. I cannot remember what it's called, but it's like a little premonition.
Yeah, it's a little glimpse of things. It kind of sets the tone. Foreshadowing. Sometimes it's foreshadowing. Sometimes with sitcoms, a lot of times it's almost like a weird little joke, just like kind of set the stage. And not even set the stage a lot of times, set the tone. You know, you're like, oh, I'm watching something funny. I get the gag. Like when you're watching most crime shows, a lot of times it's like a jogger in the woods is arguing with their boyfriend, and all of a sudden they come across dead body, and they're like, oh my god, and then it comes to Law and Order, and then all of a sudden it's like the cops are showing up, right? Like that little bit at the beginning, we've all seen some variation of this, right? That is a cold open, yeah. So that's a cold open there. Got it, cool. All right. What other questions do you have? Yeah, doubles. No.
All right, so I have a really ignorant question.
Oh, fire away. I love them.
Okay.
There's no ignorant questions.
I've recently discovered that writing's like my passion.
All right, yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm like trying to figure out what my first project is. And so I have one idea of basically writing just like a collection of emails. I read emails all day. That's like much more accessible to me.
Sure.
The idea of doing a graphic novel is very intimidating, but I do have a good idea for like an original cast of superhero characters.
Sure, yeah.
I have no artistic skill. So like the barrier just feels so dauntingly high for me.
No, I understand. It can be hard, yeah.
So like, what are your recommendations? Like, do you have any advice for like finding an artist or like, and I don't even know what the right question to ask is, but I feel like you get my vibe.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So I'm going to go through both a little bit. I will say about you doing a book about emails, that's really interesting because if you go back and look at like the original Bram Stoker's Dracula, if you actually read that book, you know, it's not a narrative book, it's a collection of letters. Realistically, it's a collection of like them writing letters back and forth about what's happening, and that's how the story is told.
Frankenstein is also written that way.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. That's why I came up with Dear Dracula, because Bram Stoker's Dracula was letters. That's how I got the idea for Dear Dracula. Because I had this moment where I was like, maybe you actually write a letter to Dracula, and that's what came about that story. And like at the point, that was actually turned into a cartoon on Cartoon Network. Just as a point of the email thing, like I think that's fascinating. When it comes to finding an artist for your graphic novel, that is one of the hardest parts of the job, just being super honest with you. You know, when I was starting out, it was almost a little easier in a way. But, you know, I saved a lot of money and I just paid artists. Like I find them online. I pay them to do pitches. Sometimes the publisher or the editor will find the artist for you. So, you know, like I said, we have a lot of local places. So let's say you go to a publisher and you have a pitch. So when I do these books, I have one in here. I write pitch on one page. So I kind of have this rule about my initial pitches. They're always 1 page long. And I basically just tell you what the story is in the most. Yeah, so look at this right here. So this is actually my original pitch for Nailfire. It's all right here. It's really where I explain what the story is going to be, what the twist is, give the overall tone. It is less beginning, middle, and end because it was going to be an ongoing book. It was going to be a long one. So it was less about, you know, so like I'll go back to using Law and Order as an example. You know, when you're pitching Law and Order to the network or to somebody, you know, it's a show about, like with Law and Order in particular, you know, oh, it's a show about these cops, they're going to catch a criminal, or they're going to try to, and then the DA is going to try to prosecute them. But each episode is going to be a different case, right? Comics are very similar in a way where it's like, especially if you're going to be doing something that's more episodic for a comic, it's more about how pitching the world and the tone and what kind of stories you're going to tell than beginning, middle, and end, here's my 6 issues. That does happen. So like with this one, when I did this one, I did write a much longer document that was like, here's everything. But so here's what I'm saying to you. So a lot of times you write your pitch out. You got your character notes, you kind of write your first issue. If you go to a publisher and you give them that and they like it, they will then find an artist for you. And at that point, what I recommend you do, if you're really green, is let them do that. Like they have a lot of experience there and they will help you. And that will, trust me, that will be a humongous weight off your shoulders for you to do that. If you yourself are trying to make a graphic novel and you'll self-publish it, or you want to really package it and then show it to a publisher, which I've done that a lot, probably more than I've done the other way. I recommend starting small, so you do like 6 or 8 pages, like a short story version of it, or for example, a cold open of it, And then what I did was back in the day, so it's a little different now. I went to a website called DeviantArt, and it basically was like a portfolio for artists. Now you kind of have that, and it's mostly just Instagram. You go on Instagram, you find artists you like, and you just message them. And if you're saving up the money and you're going to pay them, you just treat it like a job. I'm offering this money. Do you want to do it? And when you're really starting off, one thing I recommend for you really starting off is, and don't be afraid to do this, is go to conventions. So here in town, we have 2. We actually have more than that, but there's a few other like smaller press ones. But for you, I recommend something like Rose City Comic Con, which is in September. You just go, you walk up down RS Alley. There are some artists that are totally willing to talk to you. One that's really great, if you ever want to talk to somebody, I would recommend, there's a local artist, his name is Steve Lieber. He's done a lot of comics. He's an educator.
You say Lieber or
Lieber. Steve Lieber. There is a bookstore on Northeast. It's called Books with Pictures. He actually has what he calls office hours every Friday. So you could go and you can sit with him and talk comics with him. For the most part, it's for artists. But I mean, Steve is one of the best resources. Like he's a great guy, great teacher. There's a studio here in town. They're called Helioscope. It's all comic artists. They're all in a studio in downtown Portland. And he is one of the leaders of that group. And that's why I always say, like, he doesn't really teach, but I always consider him an educator. He's very, very good. He's been around for a while. I know storytelling really well. But it's always good just to talk to artists. Like, I got really lucky. So, I wanted to do this as a little kid. When I went to college, I went to a college for graphic design. And every single person in that building wanted to draw comic books. So I was just around people all the time. I was surrounded by artists. I actually knew more artists than writers for a long time until I started writing professionally. So I got lucky. I recognize this is one of the hardest parts. That's why I would say go to conventions first and just be like, and at conventions, there are a lot of panels. Look at the panel list for how do I break into comics? How do I write comics? How do I meet artists? A lot of those classes are there. Take them. I remember when I was a kid, or my early 20s particularly, I would be around a lot of other people in comics. And I would just go to those panels and they were like, how do you know all this stuff? How did you meet this person? How did you do this? And I was like, I went to the panels. Like I went to their free classes basically, so why wouldn't I go to those? When I was young in my early 20s, I was living in Long Beach, California. That's where I went to college. And one of the conventions we went to at Long Beach Comic Con, there was a class, it was a panel, and it was called like how to deal with editors. That's all it was, deal with editors. And I was like, I want to know how to deal with editors. Like I would love to know more information about working with an editor, And I went to this class and I was with an editor, it was Steve Wacker. And he was a younger editor at the time. And he was the editor for some books at DC Comics. And I went, and I remember I sat there and I was basically with nobody else in this class. Like nobody else showed up. And so it was just me and Steve Wacker, who was his editor. He's been editor on a bunch of really popular comics since then. He left to go to Marvel, created and worked with a lot of really great people at Marvel. A lot of stuff we have now that's on television is stuff that he worked on. But it was nobody else there but me and this editor. And then he had a guest, and the guest was a writer named Jeff Johns, who at the time, and still is, one of the most popular, Mark, you're shaking, he's like, yes. Like, Jeff was one of the most popular comic book writers of all time, and he was his guest, and it wasn't scheduled. And so I just sat there with them, and I just asked questions. And it was surprising to me, and they both were like, this is so crazy. Like, we have a class on working with editors, and no one showed up, and I was like, I'm here to learn, So as much as you can absorb, and there's books you can get to, like the Understanding Comics is a big one. That's one of my personal favorites. And then there's Words and Pictures that was written by Brian Michael Bendis, who's also a local author. That one's really good as well. It was actually based on his class that I actually took. It was his notes from the very first class I ever did, and that was at PSU. He still teaches it. I would recommend that one too. He has a class at PSU you can take. But yeah, as much as you could absorb, like getting books, just, asking a lot of questions, you know. I mean, it took me a while, you know. It's like I started, I said before, it was like I started off in college trying to write comics, just getting stuff out there and learning. And I started, you know, self-publishing, getting stuff out there until about 2007, 2008. By the time 2010 came around, I was, you know, full time. That's what I was doing every day. But it took 10 years really to get there. And